everyone, and welcome to our webinar, How to Write a Winning MBA Resume. My name is Nelly, and I'll be the moderator today on behalf of UniMy Prep team. Our speaker is Dr. Loubna Bouamane. She is a former director of MBA Admissions and a founder of the Admissions Concierge. She has over 15 years of higher education experience and has coached hundreds of applicants through the MBA application process. So I'm very happy to have her here. Before starting, I just want to let you know that you can ask questions anytime during the webinar using the Q&A box, and we'll take time to answer at the end of the session. All questions are welcome, so don't hesitate. So I think we are all set now, so I'm giving the floor to you, Lubna.
All right, thank you, Nelly, for this kind introduction. So again, I'm Lubna, the founder of the Admission Concierge. Like Nelly mentioned, I've been in higher education for many, many years, including 5 years as a director of admission at the University of Miami. And as a director of admission, I interviewed thousands of applicants, read thousands of resumes. So I thought I would kind of share with you a few tips and mistakes that you should avoid when writing your MBA resume to put your best foot forward. So I guess let's jump right in. Let's start with the components of your MBA applications. Most schools will kind of require the same things. That starts with a resume, obviously, to showcase your leadership and your soft skills, your standardized test, GMAT or GRE, your transcripts. So these two elements, the GMAT, the GRE, and your undergrad transcripts will allow the admission committee to kind of assess your intellectual agility, your quantitative skills, and basically your ability, to thrive in a quant-heavy class like finance or accounting, for example. On the other hand, the essay is much more personal. This is an opportunity for you to connect with the admission committee on a personal level. So this is where you have the opportunity to talk about your formative experiences, the values that are important to you, who you are as a person, what is important to you, who's your main influence in life, what type of leader do you see yourself becoming. So it serves a very different purpose. Then your letter of recommendation are here to kind of show from a third party what type of quality you have as a future business leader. And that's why when you select your recommender, it's very, very important for you to first select someone that you trust, and second, someone that worked with you on a daily basis, day in, day out, is familiar with your work and can testify about your quality as an individual. One of the biggest mistakes you can do as an applicant when you select your recommender is just go for a high title, a CEO or CFO. Schools don't care about that. They want someone that really knows you and worked with you on a regular basis. And then you have your application form, the online application, if you will. So be careful about this one because most people kind of skim through it and answer the questions really quick. But this is actually very tricky because this is where the admission committee is going to kind of see red flags and inconsistencies. So even if the questions are repetitive, because you're like, okay, so why are they asking me about to type in my responsibilities when I already have it in my resume? Well, that's all on purpose. They're trying to catch inconsistencies. So make sure that you really pay attention to your online application. Even if you see short questions that are repetitive, it's critical that you pay attention to those and you make sure that you are consistent with what you've put in your resume. And more schools are also asking for video essays. So these video essays, typically they're about 60 seconds. And they're an opportunity for you to kind of introduce yourself. Think about it as a way to introduce yourself the first day in the classroom. How would you introduce yourself? That's it, don't overthink it. You don't have to get super creative. You don't need to do a professional video. It's just think of it as a 60-second introduction of who you are, your name, where you're from, and why you're here today. And that's it. So of all of these components, each of these elements that you put in your application have a different purpose. So the resume, which is our focus today, is really a way to accomplish the following. First, it's an opportunity for you to highlight your leadership skills or the potential. So as an MBA candidate, nobody expects you to have 15 years of management or to have led, 150 employees. But what they want to see is that you have the seed, the capacity to be a successful leader after you complete your MBA. So that's why the resume is so important. The resume is also a way for you to highlight your analytical skills. So again, they have your GMAT and they have your transcripts to kind of assess your intellectual agility, but your resume also shows how successful you were in solving, complex problems. How did you use your quantitative skills? So that's why the resume is also so important. The third reason why your resume is important is because it shows the impact that you've had. And this is really the main difference between a professional a professional resume and an MBA resume. And I'll get into the details a little later, the difference between the two. I think it's critical that you understand that to avoid one of the most common mistakes that I've seen. So everything is based around impact. So everything has to be quantified. And fourth and last element of your resume is an opportunity for you to show your ability to give back. And to do that, we're going to focus on your extracurricular activities, volunteering experience. So why is that important? Why is your ability to give back important when it comes to an MBA application? Well, simply because, and this is particularly true for US-based schools, they're looking for applicants that have, the potential to give back, someone who's going to be very involved in the classroom, not someone who's going to sit back and just listen and take note. They want someone who's hands-on, that's going to work as a team to solve, to solve cases. And more than that, they want someone who's going to stay involved with the university after they graduate as an alum, staying engaged with the schools, not just through donations, but also through, participating in recruiting events, helping future grads. So they want to see that you have this in you. You have this seed, you have this passion for giving back. And that's why the extracurricular activity are critical. And that's one of the main difference between a professional resume and an MBA resume. So let's dive into the difference between the two. So let's look at these two resumes right now. On the left side, you have what I would call your typical professional resume. There's an introduction, and then there's the skills with bullet points, using very technical terms, a lot of jargon, something that may not be accessible to the admission committee. Because remember, not everybody comes from a technical background. As a matter of fact, a lot of admission officers are not even from a business background. They are from either HR, some are from education, some come from very different backgrounds. So don't assume that they are familiar with all the technical terms and jargon of your industry. So you should at all costs avoid this type of bullet points with technical terms. In here, you see that education is at the bottom. It's secondary, in a professional MBA, in a professional resume, sorry, which is quite the opposite for the MBA resume. Your education should be front and center. So professional resume, very technical. Education is secondary, and they focus really on the responsibilities as opposed to the impact that you have. Now, on the right side of the screen, you have what an MBA resume should look like. So there's still a description about, what this person does. It's basically what I call the elevator pitch, where they describe who they are and what they do. Then you see the education section is much more fleshed out, and it's front and center. What do they want to see? As an admission committee, what you want to see first is what school you graduated from, what was your major, what was your GPA. If you took additional courses, you have to mention them. I see this person here took Math MBA, and he took a class about spreadsheet, finance, statistics, economics, and accounting. So you want to mention that in your MBA resume. And you also want to add, well, here it's not in here, but you also want to put your GMAT score or your GRE score and the IELTS or TOEFL score if you have it. So that's why, you know, education is really front and center. Then you focus on your professional experience, and really you want to give your current position the biggest, you know, spot in your resume. You really want to get into the specifics of what you've done, and we'll go into that a little later. And the final section here at the bottom are your extracurricular activities. Remember how I told you schools are looking for people that have the potential to give back? So this is where you put everything that you've done in terms of volunteering, sports, whatever the case may be. So this is really the main difference between a professional resume and an MBA resume. The MBA resume should focus on, first of all, education. It has to be much more detailed in that aspect. The professional experience has to be impact-based. We'll get into that a little later. And your extracurricular activity needs to be featured. Okay, so there's basically 5 components of an MBA resume. Your contact information. Sometimes you can, on the top, with your contact information, you can put a link to your LinkedIn, but sometimes, you know, adcoms print your resume, so they don't necessarily have, you know, the ability to click, but it's always good to put it there. They will check it anyway, and we'll get to that a little bit later, and I'll tell you why it's extremely important that you have a very clean, curated LinkedIn. So contact information, professional profile. So like I said earlier, this is your elevator pitch. Who you are as a professional, what is your specialty, what industry you're in, and what are the skills that you developed. Don't make it longer than 3 to 4 sentences. But this is, I think, the first thing that most admission committee will read. So make sure it's concise and to the point. Then your work experience, obviously, and we'll dive into the specifics a little later in terms of what needs to go there. Your education, be very specific. Don't mention high school. Anything high school doesn't matter. So start with your undergrad degree. If you happen to have a master's, add it. Remember to add your GPA, remember to add your GMAT or GRE score, and remember to add your IELTS or TOEFL scores. And finally, extracurricular activities, awards, and recognitions. So I get a lot of questions about, should I add my professional certifications? My answer to that is, for the most part, no, unless you have taken the CFA, for example. I think the CFA is something that you need to mention. But other than that, I think most certifications are irrelevant to the MBA application. And remember that we have very limited real estate on a resume. It's a 1-pager, so there's only so much you can do. So at some point you will have to make a cut. And I think certifications, unless again, it's a CFA or something similar, doesn't really need to be mentioned in the resume. Sorry. So, I think I skipped a couple. So tip number 1, when it comes to a resume, like I said, the admission committee has thousands of resume to review. And they don't usually read every document in your application. The resume is really the first document that they're going to look through. So it's critical that you make it easy for them to read. And when I say easy to read is in terms of formatting. I mean, you know, it's okay to show your personality in the way you format your resume, but my advice to you as a former director of admission is to really keep it simple. You want to be able to just skim through the main parts, the main information, and extract the information that you need so that you can decide whether you want to move forward and dive into the rest of the application or put it aside. So that's how important your resume is. That is the first document they're going to look at to decide, do I keep reading further or do I put this application to the side? So you have one chance to make a good impression with your resume. That's why it's so critical that you really pay attention to it. And when I work with my clients, we always start with their resume. Whatever they come to me with is usually completely deconstructed, and we rebuild it step by step. That's how important this document is. So I shared with you the different components of a resume. The tip number 2, quantify and give concrete example. So include numbers and figures whenever possible. It's much more persuasive to say, for example, that you have saved the company $100 million in a given quarter to just say, I perform effective cost analysis. So you want to mention, for example, sales figures, operating budgets when you can, and include the size of your team or your company's client base, just to get a sense of how large your responsibilities are and the scope of what you have to handle on a daily basis. And also, if you were in charge of hiring people in your department, how many people did you interview? How many office branches did you visit? How many countries did you travel to? Use specific dates, use specific figures whenever you can. And it's much more effective to say, I traveled to Nigeria to meet, with, someone in there and worked on this, than to say, I traveled abroad for business. I visited, 10 countries for business. Everything has to be very, very specific. So how do you show impact in your resume? One of the key to be successful in showing impact is to start each bullet point with an action verb. In here, I'm giving you 2 examples. You have a business development associate and an assistant financial manager. See, for the business development associate, how we started his every single bullet point with an action verb: redesigned, implemented, completed. So what it shows here is really his ability to lead, to complete a project from initiation to delivery. And see how he finishes every sentence with a number, saving the company a minimum of 15 million annually. Reduced refund requests by 32%, completed in depth, blah, 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 boosting revenue by 11.8%. Every single bullet point should include the following: a verb, an action verb, and a number. It doesn't have to be necessarily a dollar amount. It could be a percent. It could be time saved. It could be the size of the team, whatever it is. If it's not quantified, it didn't happen. That's what I tell my clients. Every single thing has to be quantified. And the same for our assistant financial manager in here. Sorry. Let me go back to my slide. He's here responsible for all financial analysis. He kind of, starts with giving the scope of his responsibilities, but always quantifying everything, percent or dollar amount. All right. Next one, tip number 3, focus on leadership analytical skills. And this is here, again, the main difference between a professional resume and an MBA resume. The goal of an MBA resume is to highlight your leadership skills and show that you have the ability to become a successful business leader, and that you have the analytical skills to solve complex business problems. So how do you display leadership analytical capabilities? There is 5 ways to do this. Number 1, analytical decision making. So you want to highlight the project that you worked on that required research and analysis. Let's say, you developed an Excel spreadsheet, or you developed a formula that saves, employees' time and minimize human error. So that's what you want to feature. And remember to include numbers with it. Remember, impact is everything. Number 2, delegation and teamwork. So you want to describe how you manage the team or project. You want to provide specific example on how you delegated responsibilities, established expectations, tracked progress, provided feedback. So this is all about your ability to lead people and to bring a project to fruition using your leadership skills, but also your analytical skills. Number 3, creative problem solving. So you want to use your resume to demonstrate your ability to think outside the box. Let's say you were faced with a very specific business challenge. And you were able to come up with a solution that nobody thought about. So you want to put that in your resume. And again, don't forget to put the result or the impact that that idea had and how, when you solved that problem. Number 4 is tech savvy. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, technology is part of every job nowadays. So whether it's a computer language, coding, project management systems, if you've used the technology to streamline or improve a process, you want to mention it. You don't want to get into too much specifics, but you want to mention, everything, every type of technology that you used that to solve a business issue. And last and not least, your communication skills. You want to show that you have the ability to communicate like a leader. So to do that, you're going to highlight every corporate report that you wrote, any case study, newsletter, training material, public events, public speaking events. All that shows that you have the ability to communicate in writing, but also verbally. So don't forget to mention that. Let's say, for example, you want to say that you were, you give, you were a keynote speaker in a conference. So when you do that, it's not enough to just say that I was a keynote speaker in this conference. You want to say, what was the conference about? How many attendees? And the length of your participation, as well as the subject that you tackled during that speech. So that's how specific you will have to be. Tip number 4, carefully craft your extracurricular activities. Okay, so we looked into the participants of these webinars, and we realized that people were from all over the world. And this is the extracurricular activities, from my experience, is something that can be a little bit of a challenge for my international clients, simply because I think it's a very American thing to focus on extracurricular activities. And this is not something that we necessarily have in other countries. For my own example, I'm born and educated in Europe, in France specifically, and extracurricular activities are not that widespread as they are here in the US. And I know that, for example, for my Indian clients, it's sometimes the case. We really kind of struggle to find things to put in these sections. However, for American schools, like I said, this is a critical part of your application, because they want to see that you have the potential to lead, but also the potential to give back. And that's something that is very important for American schools. And more than that, they want to see that you are a well-rounded person, that you have interests outside of work, that you have interests outside of your academic life. So if, like me, you don't have an extensive extracurricular history, there's still a way to go around this. And I'm going to tell you how. So the first thing that you want to do is to really kind of think outside the box. Have you organized any fundraising activities? Did you do any volunteer work? And it can be anything, think about your current job. Have you, I don't know, took an initiative that developed, I don't know, a book club, or, an outing, or fundraising? Everybody does that, at their job. So you can dive into this and find, instances of, you being involved in your community. And if you really cannot think about anything, think about sports. Are you doing any sports? Are you mentoring someone? Like, do you have, I don't know, a kid or a teenager that you help with homework? Are you coaching any team? Are you teaching any class? All this can fall into the extracurricular activity section. So you really have to think out of the box. Just because you didn't volunteer for an entire summer in a country far away from home doesn't mean that you cannot you don't have anything going on. You just need to dive into your path and think about what you do on a daily basis that can, be considered extracurricular. And that's what we do as consultants. We'll help you dive into what you've done and identify things that we can use in that aspect. So now that I've shared 4 tips to craft your resume, I want to share with you some of the biggest mistakes that are a resume killer, 100%. Number 1, and this is in the majority of the cases, this is why an application gets put aside, is inconsistencies. Inconsistencies in the application itself. So let's say you mention, dates of a position that you've held, and then in your essay, you write something that is off or doesn't match, or in the rest of the application. And that's why at the beginning of this presentation, I was telling you that the online application with the small, short questions are important. This is where they catch inconsistencies. So make sure that everything matches. And more importantly, and I cannot tell you how many times I caught red flags by doing very, simple research on the web and, come across social media or LinkedIn and realize that, whatever is on your LinkedIn doesn't match your resume, huge red flag. So before you submit your application, I'm asking you to please check your LinkedIn and make sure that everything that is in your LinkedIn matches what is in your resume. Number 2, it's hard to read, too much jargon, overwhelming designs. I understand if you want to show your personality through your resume, but remember, when we read resume, we read thousands upon thousands of resumes. So we basically just skim through and we want to see the main information. We don't care about the colors. We don't care about, the little drawings, and just keep it simple. The simpler, the better. Repetitive. Sometimes you feel like you don't have much to say, so you are compelled to kind of, repeat the same bullet points. So with minor changes, that sends a big red flag to the reader. So he thinks that, okay, so this person really doesn't have much impact. They didn't have any much leadership capabilities. They don't have any quantitative, skills. Otherwise, they would not have to repeat the same thing over and over. So let's say you have your current position, and to avoid this, being repetitive, what you want to do is that each bullet point serves a purpose. You will have 1 bullet point for leadership, 1 bullet point for teamwork, 1 bullet point for analytical skills, where you're going to describe a very technical approach that you use to solve a business problem. And then a bullet point about something that is very different. So for example, you don't want to be all of the bullet points for the position to be all focused on quantitative stuff. You want to make sure that there's a good mix, and that's how you avoid being repetitive. Number 4, no impact. Again, if it's not quantified, it didn't happen as far as the admission committee is concerned. So make sure that everything that you've done is quantified. And last but not least, misspellings and grammatical error. So if you submit a sloppy resume, the admission committee is going to think that you're a sloppy candidate and a potential sloppy MBA student, and they don't want that. So make sure that, there's no spelling mistakes, no grammatical errors. There's a lot of tools online that you can use nowadays to make sure that you don't fall into these pitfalls. Use Grammarly, for example, which is free. That can help you with that, or have someone review your resume before you click submit. So here's what I want you to take away from this presentation. Remember that your MBA resume is about achievement, not responsibilities. Responsibilities is what you put in a professional resume, because a recruiter wants to see what you've done and how long you've done it, and whether you have the technical ability to carry on your job description. The MBA resume is about achievement and the impact that you've had in each organization that you've been involved in. Start each bullet point with an action verb. Led, spearheaded, developed. Those are the words that, powerful action verb that, convey a sense of leadership. Include a qualification summary. Remember, this is your elevator pitch. Who you are as a professional, what industry you're in, and what are your main skills. Keep your resume to 1 page. So unless you're applying to an executive MBA and you have 15 years of work experience, a resume should not be more than a page. It has to be 1 page. And more importantly, by the way, make sure that you follow the requirements. Some schools, for example, they want a blind resume. They don't want any name, they don't want any address, they don't want anything. Some are very specific in terms of the font that they want, the spacing. So make sure above all else that you start with that. What are the requirements? And then use these takeaways to make sure that you build a powerful resume. Continuing with your takeaways, no jargon or acronyms. Remember, not everyone who's reading your resume has a technical background, so you want to make it as accessible as possible. Quantify every single bullet points. Again, if it's not quantified, it didn't happen. Make it easy to read. Again, go easy with the formatting. Make it simple, make it easy to read, make it flow. Make sure that each section is clearly identifiable and that the key information is easy to find. Chronological order. 99% of the schools are expecting you to, display your work experience on a chronological order unless stated otherwise. So, and again, remember, 6 seconds is usually what we spend on a resume before we decide that we want to move forward and read the rest of the application or just put it aside. So you have 6 seconds to make an impression. That's not a lot of time. So you want to make sure that you follow, these rules. All right, so that's my presentation for today. We're going to open up the floor for questions in a little bit. Just to give you a little bit of background about who we are. Like I mentioned earlier, I am a former director of MBA admission, and I have direct experience making admissions and scholarship decisions. I advise applicants from 40 countries. We are actually specialized in working with applicants that have a non-traditional background. And we are specialized in top 10 MBA programs, both in Europe and in the US. We have offices in both. So I'm gonna leave here my contact information, and don't hesitate to send me an email after this presentation so that I can send you a copy of this PowerPoint presentation if you wish. And I think, Nelly, we're gonna open it up to questions. What do you think?
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation. Indeed, we have several questions already, and still time, guys, to ask your questions. Just type in the Q&A box. Okay, I'm starting right away with the first question. This is from someone who was watching very carefully, and this person is asking, should we include address information as contact? I saw that in your example, there were only email and phone number. Thanks.
I strongly suggest that you do not put your address. Why? Simply because it takes space and they don't care. The only thing you should include is your country, in my opinion.
Really makes sense. Okay. Can you give some tips on styling? For example, using different fonts or underlining?
Well, first of all, the font should be the same throughout your resume. That goes without saying. I would say Times New Roman or Arial is, very what most people use and what most schools, like to use. Don't go smaller than 10. And also don't cut the margin too much, otherwise it's overwhelming and hard to read. So I would say Arial or Times in terms of font, single spaced, 10 in terms of sizing and you're pretty safe.
That's great. As long as it's readable.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, another question. What do MBA seekers ask you most often when you advise them? That's an interesting question.
Okay, so there's multiple. The first question that they ask is, do I stand a chance for this program? So really, that's the first conversation that we have. So what I do is that I review the transcripts, I review their resume, we talk about their career goals. And based on this information, I'm better suited to guide them towards programs that are a good fit. And then I'm always 100% honest in terms of, what are the odds for them to be admitted in a specific program. So I would say that's the first question that they ask, what are my chances? And then the second question that I get the most is, what is the most important part of the application? And the answer is two things. First and foremost, the resume, because like I said, this is the first thing that they're going to read in your application, and they're only going to spend a couple of seconds on it. So that's why it's very important. And number two, your essay. Your essay is critical because this is your opportunity for you to connect with the admission committee on a personal level. You are more than a GPA, you are more than a GMAT. Those are just numbers attached to your application. They want to know you as a person. And that's why a good essay can really make or break your application.
Thank you very much. That was very useful information. Okay, let's get back on the resume questions. There's a question, what is the perfect length of the MBA resume?
Okay, so the rule of thumb is it has to be 1 page per decade of work experience. So if you are a typical MBA applicant, the length is a 1 page. If you are an executive MBA applicant, it's still better to have a 1 pager, but it's okay to have a 2 pager if you have, let's say, 15 years of work experience. But the rule of thumb for the full-time MBA, just keep it to 1 page.
Great. The questions keep coming, so I'm continuing here. Okay, there is this person saying, I have master in electrical engineering and around 2 years of work experience as a marketing specialist. Should I put my work experience above my education in the city?
So it's really a matter of personal preference. For me, I prefer to see education first because that's where I assess your, I would say, intellectual agility. Looking at your GPA, looking at your GMAT score, I kind of get a sense of where you are, and then dive into what you do as a professional. But it's perfectly okay to put your professional experience first and education second, as long as you don't skip important information in the education section. That's the most important part.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Another interesting question. If my major social impact activities have only occurred over a couple of months, is this okay from admissions point of view?
Yes. I mean, most of my clients who have extracurricular activities and volunteering and activities, social impact type of activities, they do it over the summer. So yes, it's perfectly acceptable. I would say anything that is a month or to 2 months is okay mentioning. Obviously, the longer you've been doing it, the better. But I would say a month is really a minimum.
Great. Okay, we have a question. Can we remove articles A and D from the resume? That's interesting.
This is a great question. So the answer is only if the sentence is still readable. I would say in most cases, yes, you can do without, because at the end of the day, your resume is not an essay, so you don't have to really craft, the same way. However, just make sure that it doesn't take away from the meaning and that you can still understand the sentence. So I would say yes, in most cases.
Okay, we have one question left. So before reading it, guys, this is your last chance to ask your questions here live. Okay, and there is this person asking, coming from a design background, how would I format the description of a freelance self-started work?
How would I format the description? You mean, I'm not sure I understand the question. Do you mean the professional summary on top?
I don't know. I guess the person is wondering how they should present the fact that they were freelance or doing self-started work.
Oh, I see. So I would say the rule is the same. Start with an action verb and describe your projects. If you had an audience, if you made presentations, if you I don't know, if your work was displayed somewhere, just make sure that you mention all that by mentioning, the number of people attended, if that's something that was in print, how many readers does this publication have. Everything has to be quantified, whether it's a technical field, a business field, or something that is artistic. Even in the artistic field, there's still a way to quantify. If you sold artwork, how much was it sold? This type of thing. Just try to attach a number to everything that you've done, whether it's artistic or whether it's business or whether it's technology or engineering.
Thank you very much. I really liked how you said it. If it's not quantified, it doesn't count.
Yes.
So this should be your takeaway from today, guys. Thank you once again for giving this interesting presentation. Just see another question. Sorry, I was going to
Sure.
miss it. Is it okay to have 60% of the resume focus on work experience and 40% on education and extracurriculars? Or should work experience capture a larger part?
Okay, so 40% for extracurricular activities, I think is a little too much. I would really make work experience at least 75% of your resume, because and giving the most importance to the current job that you hold, because that's really the most important part, really. So I would say if you keep your extracurricular activities to 25 to 30% of your resume, that's plenty.
Thank you very much. For everyone who has more questions, don't hesitate to contact Lubna. Thank you for attending today. Thank you, Lubna, for giving us the chance to host you and for this
Thank you, Nelly.
Great advice.